There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. They wear the camouflage of routine, of a Tuesday night, of the quiet hum of a refrigerator in a sleeping apartment. They do not announce themselves with thunder or fanfare. They slip in through the cracks of the mundane, and only in retrospect do you see them for what they were. The subtle shifting of tectonic plates, the quiet groan of a foundation settling into a new and permanent alignment. The world looks the same before and after, but you know, in a place deeper than bone, that everything has been irrevocably altered. For me, that moment smelled of chlorine and exhaustion, and it was defined by the cartography of a bruise. We were on the couch, a familiar geography for us after a hard practice. The television murmured in the corner, casting flickering blue and orange light across the room, a digital hearth we rarely paid attention to. It was just noise to fill the silence, a buffer against the things that might be said if the quiet grew too deep. Liam was sprawled beside me, his long frame a study in controlled collapse. His head rested on a cushion near my shoulder, his legs stretched out to the other end of the worn leather. We had existed in this configuration countless times, a silent agreement of shared space and mutual fatigue that had evolved over the years from teammates to roommates to something I had never dared to name. But tonight was different. The air itself felt different, heavier, charged with a strange, static potential. It was a simple gesture, born from the idle curiosity that follows physical depletion. My arm was draped over the back of the sofa, and a deep, mottled bruise bloomed on my shoulder, a testament to a clumsy encounter with a lane line during a particularly grueling set of sprints. Liam's eyes, which had been half closed, drifted to it. I watched him from the corner of my vision, my own body a rigid landscape of feigned relaxation. He shifted, a slow, deliberate movement that brought his hand from his chest to my shoulder. His fingers were cool against my skin, a stark contrast to the heated throb of the contusion. He didn't press, didn't prod. He simply traced the edge of the discoloration, a light, feathery touch that sent a shiver down my spine, a tremor that had nothing to do with the chill of the evening. His touch was a question without words. It wasn't the clinical, detached touch of a teammate assessing an injury, nor the casual, unthinking contact of a friend. It was something else entirely. His fingertip moved with an almost reverent slowness, mapping the violent purple and yellow border as if it were the coastline of an unknown continent. I held my breath, my entire universe shrinking to that single point of contact. The sound of the television faded away. The hum of the city outside our window ceased to exist. All that remained was the whisper of his skin against mine and the frantic, silent drumbeat of my own heart against my ribs. He traced it once, a full, languid circle. And then he did it again. And he didn't look away. His gaze was fixed on his own hand, on my skin, his expression unreadable in the dim, shifting light. It was in that sustained, unbroken contact, in that focused, silent attention, that the ordinary Tuesday night cracked open, revealing the precipice on which we had been standing for years. To understand the weight of that moment, you have to understand the architecture of the silence we had built. Liam and I had met 6 years prior, two freshmen thrown into the chlorinated crucible of collegiate swimming. He was the sun, and I was a planet caught in his orbit. Liam was a sprinter, specializing in the violent, beautiful chaos of the butterfly. He moved through the water and the world with an explosive, seemingly effortless grace. Laughter came easily to him, as did friends, as did a kind of golden confidence that seemed to burn from within. He was all bright surfaces and infectious energy, the kind of person who could make the punishing 5 a.m. practices feel less like a chore and more like a shared conspiracy against the sleeping world. I was his opposite in nearly every way. A distance swimmer, my entire athletic career was built on patience, on rhythm, on the solitary grind of counting laps and strokes for miles on end. I was quiet, observant, more comfortable in the deep end of my own thoughts than in the shallow waters of small talk. I found my peace in the metronomic repetition of my own breathing, the muffled quiet of being underwater. On land, I was awkward, a creature out of its element, perpetually feeling like I was translating my thoughts from a language no one else spoke. My chosen pursuit outside the pool was photography, a passion that perfectly suited my nature. I was a collector of quiet moments, an archivist of stolen glances and the way light fell across a room. I was always behind the camera, never in front of it. Our friendship should not have worked, but it did. It was forged in the shared exhaustion of two-a-days, in the mutual understanding of aching muscles, and the singular, monastic focus required to shave 1/10 of a second off your time. He saw past my quietness, and I saw through his easy charm to the moments of pressure and doubt he rarely let anyone else witness. He would find me after a race, win or lose, and clap a heavy, wet hand on my shoulder, his grin wide and genuine. "You're a machine, Ethan," he'd say, and in his voice, it wasn't an insult. It was the highest form of praise one endurance athlete could give another. I, in turn, learned to read the subtle shifts in his posture, the slight tightening around his eyes that told me the pressure of being the team's anchor was getting to him. I wouldn't say anything, but I'd make sure his favorite post-practice snack was in the fridge, or I'd put on the stupid action movie I knew he loved to watch to decompress. When we graduated, becoming roommates was a decision based on logistics and economics, a simple extension of the life we already knew. We found a small, two-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood that was close enough to the city for his consulting job and quiet enough for my freelance photography work. Our shared life fell into a comfortable rhythm. We were two separate entities orbiting a common center of gravity. Our kitchen became a repository for our two distinct lives. His neatly arranged meal prep containers for the week, my chaotic collection of mugs for the endless cups of tea I drank while editing photos into the early hours. Our living room was neutral territory, a space of comfortable silences and occasional shared meals eaten on the couch. And it was in that domestic quiet that my feelings for him, feelings I had successfully submerged for 4 years under the relentless tide of training and competition, began to surface. It was no longer possible to ignore the way my breath caught when he'd walk into the living room after a shower, his hair damp and smelling of mint shampoo, a towel slung low on his hips. I found myself cataloging the small details of his existence with the same meticulous focus I applied to my photography. The way he chewed on his lower lip when he was concentrating on a spreadsheet. The specific cadence of his footsteps in the hall that told me if he'd had a good day or a bad one. The small, almost imperceptible dimple that appeared next to his mouth, but only when he was genuinely, truly amused by something. I kept it all locked away, of course. It was a secret gallery of moments, curated and stored in the darkroom of my mind. Our friendship was a carefully constructed ecosystem, a delicate balance of unspoken rules and shared history. It was the most stable, most important relationship in my life, and I would have sooner cut off my own arm than risk demolishing it. So I became a master of self-containment, building walls within myself to house this dangerous, tender affection. I watched him date a series of women, bright, bubbly women who seemed like perfect reflections of his own sunny disposition. I was polite to all of them, a friendly but distant fixture in his life, the quiet roommate. I listened when he talked about them, offering neutral, supportive advice while my own heart felt like a clenched fist in my chest. And I felt a strange, guilty relief each time those relationships ended, a quiet fizzling out rather than a dramatic explosion. It was a terrible feeling to wish for his mild unhappiness, but I couldn't help it. Each breakup meant he returned, fully, to our shared space, to the easy comfort of our friendship, and I could have him back, at least in this way. The shift, when it came, started with Sarah. She was different from the others. She was a software engineer, sharp and witty, with a calm, self-possessed energy that seemed to ground Liam. They dated for nearly 2 years, and for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that this was it. This was the one who would stick. I began to practice a different kind of resignation, a settling into the permanent reality of being just his friend. I braced myself for the inevitable conversation about one of them moving out, for the slow, painful dismantling of our shared life. I tried to see it as a natural progression, a necessary step into adulthood. But the thought of it was a physical ache, a hollowness that echoed in my ribs. But the conversation never came. Instead, something else happened. The easy laughter that usually filled our apartment when she was over began to sound strained. Their quiet dinners became quieter. I would retreat to my room, turning up my music to give them space, but the silence that seeped under my door was more telling than any argument. It was a silence filled with gaps, with the weight of things unsaid. Then one evening, I came home to find Liam sitting alone on the couch, staring at the blank television screen. A half-empty pint of ice cream was melting on the coffee table beside him. "She's gone," he said, his voice flat. He didn't look at me. "We're done." There was no drama, no shouting match that I had overheard. He explained it in clipped, emotionless sentences. It had been a mutual decision, a slow realization that they were good together, but not great. They were compatible, but not connected in the way that mattered. "It was like we were running on parallel tracks," he said, finally turning to look at me, his eyes clouded with a confusion that seemed deeper than simple sadness. "Close, but never meeting," he shrugged, a gesture that was meant to be casual, but was laden with a profound weariness. It just sort of ran out of steam. I didn't know what to say. The selfish, treacherous part of me felt a dizzying surge of relief, which was immediately followed by a wave of shame. I sat down on the other end of the couch, leaving a wide, respectful chasm between us. "I'm sorry, man," I managed, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. He just nodded, and we sat there in silence for a long time as the evening light faded outside our window. That night, the foundation didn't just settle, it cracked. And through that crack, something new and unpredictable began to grow. In the weeks that followed, the atmosphere in our apartment changed. Liam, who had always treated our home as a charging station between his work and his social life, began to dwell in it. He stopped going out with his friends as much, trading late nights at bars for quiet evenings on our couch. He was like a ship that had lost its moorings, and he had drifted back to the only safe harbor he knew. And I, the quiet lighthouse keeper, simply watched him. He was unmoored, and I was his anchor, whether he knew it or not. The change was subtle at first. He started talking more, not about the breakup, but about everything and nothing. He'd tell me about his day at work, about the frustrating bug in his code, about the funny email he got from his sister. It was a constant stream of low-stakes narration, as if he needed the sound of his own voice to prove he still existed and my presence to validate it. This was the genesis of the ritual. It began with a simple request one Friday night. "Hey," he said, his voice quiet from the kitchen where he was staring blankly into the refrigerator. "You wanna, I don't know, watch a movie or something? I don't think I can handle being inside my own head tonight." My heart gave a painful lurch. It was the first time he had explicitly sought out my company as a remedy for his own unease. I agreed, of course, my voice carefully neutral. We settled on the couch, him at one end, me at the other, a respectable three-cushion gap between us. We watched some brainless action movie, and for 2 hours, the predictable rhythm of car chases and explosions filled the space between us. It was comfortable. It was safe. The next night, he asked again, and the night after that. Movie night became our new default setting. It was the unspoken plan for every evening that wasn't claimed by some other obligation. And slowly, imperceptibly at first, the geography of the couch began to change. The three-cushion gap shrank to 2, then to 1. It was a slow, tectonic drift, a migration so gradual I could almost convince myself I was imagining it. Then one night, after a particularly draining week at his job, he let out a long sigh and simply leaned over. His head came to rest on my shoulder. The world stopped. My entire body went rigid, every muscle screaming. I was acutely aware of the weight of his head, the warmth of it seeping through my t-shirt. I could smell the faint, clean scent of his shampoo. My own breathing became a conscious, difficult effort. I stared straight ahead at the television screen, not seeing a single frame. On screen, a city was probably exploding, but the only cataclysm I was aware of was the one happening inside my own chest. Liam, for his part, seemed completely oblivious. He let out another soft sigh, this one of comfort, and settled in as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He was asleep within minutes, his breathing evening out into a soft, rhythmic puff against my neck. I sat there for the entire length of the film, a living statue, terrified that the slightest movement would break the spell. My arm went numb, and my neck began to cramp, but I didn't care. It was a kind of sweet agony, a pain I would have gladly endured for hours. When the credits rolled, I gently shook his shoulder. He stirred, blinking up at me with a dazed, sleepy confusion that was so unguarded it made my chest ache. "Oh," he mumbled, sitting up and rubbing his eyes. "Sorry, must have crashed." He didn't say anything else about it. He just shuffled off to his room, leaving me alone in the flickering blue light, my shoulders still burning with the ghost of his warmth. That night opened a door, and once opened, it was never fully closed again. The head on my shoulder became a regular occurrence. It was his tell, the signal that the day had worn him down to his foundations. I learned to anticipate it, to arrange the cushions just so, to choose a movie long enough to allow for this quiet surrender. My life became a study in contrasts. By day, I was Ethan, the quiet photographer, moving through the city with my camera, an anonymous observer. By night, I was Ethan, the human pillow, the silent repository for Liam's exhaustion and unspoken sadness. I lived in a state of perpetual, high-alert anxiety and a deep, humming contentment. It was a paradox that was slowly tearing me apart and putting me back together all at once. The ritual escalated. It was a slow, insidious creep of intimacy, always under the guise of comfort and plausible deniability. One night, he didn't just lean his head on my shoulder. He shifted his whole body, stretching out his legs and laying his head in my lap. He draped an arm casually across my stomach, his fingers brushing against the waistband of my sweatpants. I froze, my hands hovering uselessly in the air for a moment before I forced myself to relax, resting one tentatively on the couch beside his head. My fingers were inches from his hair. It took every ounce of my self-control not to reach out, not to thread my fingers through the soft strands. I could feel the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest against my legs. He was an anchor, and I was the sea floor, accepting his weight without question. I began to analyze his actions with the obsessive focus of a cryptographer trying to break a code. Every touch, every sigh, every mumbled, sleepy word was a clue to be deciphered. Was this just what friends did? I had no frame of reference. My friendships had always been built on conversation and shared activities, not this profound, silent physicality. Was he just using me as a substitute for the physical comfort he missed from his relationship with Sarah? The thought was a shard of ice in my gut. It was the most logical explanation and the most painful. I was a placeholder, a warm body in the absence of the one he really wanted. But then there were moments that defied that cold logic. Moments where he would be talking, animated about something, and he would reach out and rest his hand on my knee, leaving it there long after he had made his point. Moments where our eyes would meet across the room, and for a split second, I would see something in his gaze, a flicker of vulnerability, of a question he didn't know how to ask, that would make me forget to breathe. The apartment, once a space of two separate orbits, had become a single, shared territory defined by this new, ambiguous intimacy. The line between his side of the couch and mine had been erased. The boundary between my personal space and his had become permeable, a membrane through which warmth and touch and unspoken need could pass freely. It was intoxicating and terrifying. I felt like a photographer in a darkroom, watching an image slowly emerge in the chemical bath. I could see the outlines of something beautiful and fragile taking shape, but I was terrified that any sudden movement, any exposure to the harsh light of reality, would ruin it forever, leaving me with nothing but a blank, overexposed sheet of paper. His bedroom door became a symbol for me. He had always been meticulous about closing it. It was a clear demarcation. This is my space, that is yours. But after the breakup, he started leaving it ajar. Just a crack at first, then a few inches, then wide open. It was a subtle invitation, an architectural representation of his own lowered defenses. Sometimes, late at night, I would walk past his open door on my way to the kitchen for a glass of water, and I would see him asleep, tangled in his sheets, his face relaxed and peaceful in the moonlight filtering through his window. And I would stand there for a moment, an unseen guardian, my heart a complex knot of love and fear and a desperate, aching loneliness. He was right there, just a few feet away, and yet he was a million miles across an impassable chasm of what we were supposed to be to each other. Our teammates from the swim team, the few we still saw regularly, noticed the change, though they couldn't have understood its nature. "You guys are like an old married couple," one of them, Mark, had joked one afternoon when we'd met for coffee. Liam had laughed it off, a loud, easy sound, and he'd slung an arm around my shoulders, pulling me into a rough side hug. "Nah, Ethan's just the only one who can stand me," he'd said, his voice full of casual affection. But his grip was tight, his fingers pressing into my arm with a kind of possessive strength that felt anything but casual. I just smiled. A small, tight smile I had perfected over the years, the mask of the easygoing, quiet friend. Inside, my nerves were screaming. They saw a joke. I felt a confession. This delicate, dangerous dance continued for months. We existed in the quiet space between friendship and something more, a country with no name and no laws. I was so attuned to him, so hyper-aware of his presence, that I felt I could sense his moods from the other room. The weight of his silence was different depending on whether he was tired, or stressed, or sad. I learned the subtle variations in the way he would seek contact. A hand on my arm was for emphasis. A lean against my side while we were cooking was a sign of a stressful day. The full collapse onto me on the couch was a sign of complete emotional and physical exhaustion, a total surrender. And I was the willing recipient of it all, the safe place for him to fall apart, never demanding anything in return. I was terrified to ask for more, because I was terrified of being given nothing. The status quo was a kind of beautiful torture, but the alternative, a world without this closeness, was unthinkable. And that brings us back to the couch, back to the bruise, back to the moment where the quiet, steady pressure of months of unspoken things finally became too much for the fragile container we had built. It was a Tuesday night, late in October. The air was getting colder, and we had just come back from a grueling Masters swim practice. We weren't competing anymore, but we trained together twice a week, a habit ingrained in our DNA, a way of sweating out the stresses of our adult lives. That night's practice had been particularly brutal, a ladder of sprints that had left my muscles screaming and my lungs burning. The bruise on my shoulder was a fresh, angry testament to my exhaustion. We fell onto the couch in our usual formation, too tired to even speak at first. The television was on, some nature documentary about the deep ocean. Strange, bioluminescent creatures drifted across the screen in an inky blackness. It felt appropriate. That was where we were living, in a place without light, guided by instincts we didn't understand. And that was when he saw it. The bruise. He shifted, and his cool fingers began their slow, deliberate exploration of my skin. My breath hitched. This was different from all the other touches. The head on my shoulder, the hand on my knee, the arm across my stomach. Those could all be explained away as a search for comfort, a kind of thoughtless, platonic affection. But this was not thoughtless. This was focused. His touch was a deliberate act of mapping, of learning. His eyes were locked on his own fingers as they moved over my skin, his brow furrowed in concentration. The nature documentary narrator was murmuring about pressure and adaptation in the deep sea, and I felt a hysterical laugh bubble in my chest. He traced the bruise for what felt like an eternity. The world narrowed to the path his finger was drawing on my body. And then his hand stilled. His fingers rested lightly in the hollow of my shoulder. He didn't move. He just stopped. Slowly, so slowly, he lifted his gaze from my shoulder to my face. His eyes, usually so bright and clear, were dark and deep in the dim light, full of an intensity that made my stomach clench. The silence in the room was absolute now, a physical presence. It was the silence of a held breath, of a moment stretched taut. He was looking at me as if he were seeing me for the first time, or perhaps seeing something in me that he had been refusing to acknowledge for a very long time. His lips parted slightly, as if he were about to speak, but no words came out. My heart was a wild, panicked bird beating against the cage of my ribs. This was it, the moment of exposure. The harsh light was about to flood the darkroom, and I was terrified of what it would reveal. I could feel the tremor in his fingers, still resting on my shoulder. He was as scared as I was. That realization, more than anything, gave me a strange sense of calm. We were on this precipice together. "Ethan," he whispered. His voice was rough, barely audible over the frantic pounding in my ears. It wasn't a question. It was an invocation, a sounding of my name to see if the world would shatter. I could only manage a nod, a tiny, jerky movement. My throat was too tight for words. His eyes searched mine, and I saw a storm of emotions swirling in their depths. Confusion, fear, and something else, something tender and desperate that mirrored the ache in my own chest. "Is this?" He started, then stopped, swallowing hard. "Is this okay?" His gaze flickered down to his hand on my shoulder, then back to my eyes. He was asking about more than just the touch. He was asking about all of it. The months on the couch, the open door, the unspoken language we had developed. He was asking for permission, for guidance, for a map of this strange, new country. "Yes," I breathed, the word a wisp of air. It was the truest thing I had ever said. A flicker of relief passed over his face, so quick I might have missed it. He took a slow, shaky breath. He leaned in, his movement agonizingly slow, giving me every opportunity to pull away, to stop him, to shatter the moment. But I was frozen, held in place by the gravity of his intention. His face was inches from mine now. I could feel the warmth of his breath on my skin. He stopped, his eyes still locked on mine, asking one final, silent question. And then he whispered the words that broke the world open. "Would it be okay if I kissed you?" The directness of it, the vulnerability, stole the last of my breath. There was no room for misinterpretation, no plausible deniability. It was a clear, terrifying, beautiful question. And all I could do was nod again, closing my eyes as if in prayer. The space between us dissolved. His lips met mine, and it was not a kiss of passion or demand. It was a kiss of profound hesitation, of reverence. It was soft and tentative and searching. It was the gentlest of collisions, a question answered with a question. In that single, feather-light touch, months of unspoken yearning, of silent observation, of carefully guarded hope, all came rushing to the surface. It was a confession. It was an apology. It was a beginning. The documentary on the television was forgotten. The city outside was gone. There was only the quiet, fragile miracle of this moment, born from the simple tracing of a bruise on a Tuesday night. The morning after was a study in silence. But it was not our usual comfortable silence, the kind that was filled with mutual understanding. This was a brittle, sharp-edged silence, the kind that threatened to cut if you moved too quickly. I woke up first, my mind a chaotic jumble of replays from the night before. The kiss had not led to anything more. It had been a single, perfect, terrifying moment. Afterwards, we had pulled apart and simply looked at each other for a long time. Then, without a word, Liam had stood up and walked to his room, gently closing the door behind him. Not ajar. Closed. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, listening for any sound from his room. Nothing. The closed door felt like a verdict. It was a boundary re-established, a wall thrown back up. The vulnerability of the night before had been sealed away. I felt a cold dread seep into my bones. Had it been a mistake? A moment of loneliness-fueled confusion on his part? Was I just a convenient port in the storm of his post-breakup emotions? The thought was nauseating. The beautiful, fragile thing that had emerged in the darkroom had been exposed to the light and had vanished, leaving me with a ghost of a touch on my lips and a heart full of aching uncertainty. When I finally forced myself out of bed, the apartment felt unnaturally still. I found a note on the kitchen counter, Liam's familiar scrawl on a torn piece of paper. Went for an early run, then heading to the office. See you tonight, no hey, no talk later, just a stark, factual statement. It was a retreat, a full-scale tactical withdrawal. He was avoiding me. The hope that had bloomed so brightly in my chest just hours before began to wilt, its petals curling in on themselves, scorched by the harsh reality of the morning. The day was agony. I tried to edit photos, but the faces on my screen were blurry, indistinct. All I could see was the look in Liam's eyes just before he'd kissed me. I paced the apartment, the silence amplifying my anxiety. Our shared living space, which had been a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. Every object, the couch, the throw blanket he always used, the specific mug he drank his coffee from, was a painful reminder of the intimacy that now felt like a hallucination. Had I imagined it all? Had I so desperately wanted it to be real that I had projected my own feelings onto his simple, confused actions? My mind was a relentless prosecutor, presenting evidence for the case that I was a fool. When he finally came home that evening, the tension was a physical thing, a third presence in the room. He was polite, distant. He asked about my day with the forced cheerfulness of a stranger making small talk. He didn't meet my eyes. He busied himself with making dinner, his movements stiff and overly precise. The easy, flowing grace he usually possessed was gone, replaced by a kind of rigid control. He was building a fortress around himself, brick by painful brick of avoidance. We ate dinner at the small kitchen table, a space we usually avoided in favor of the couch. The silence was punctuated only by the clinking of our forks against the plates. I couldn't stand it. It was 1,000 times worse than an outright rejection. Rejection was clean, final. This was a slow, torturous limbo. I had to know. I had to break the silence, no matter the cost. "Liam," I said, my voice coming out quieter than I intended. He flinched, his fork stopping halfway to his mouth. He still didn't look at me. "We need to talk about last night." He put his fork down, a slow, deliberate motion. He stared at his plate. "There's nothing to talk about," he said, his voice low and tight. "It was a weird night. We were both tired. It was a mistake. The word landed like a punch to my stomach, knocking the air from my lungs. I felt a hot, prickling sensation behind my eyes. So that was it. I was a mistake. A moment of weakness. A mistake, I repeated, and this time my voice was stronger, laced with a hurt I couldn't hide. "That's all it was to you." He finally looked up, and his eyes were full of a miserable, cornered panic. "I don't know what it was, okay?" he snapped, his voice rising. "I'm confused. Everything's just a mess since Sarah and I don't know what I'm doing." "Ethan," he ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure frustration. I shouldn't have done that. It's not fair to you. It's not fair to our friendship. Our friendship?" I felt a bitter laugh escape my lips. "Is that what you were thinking about when you kissed me, Liam? Our friendship?" The accusation hung in the air between us. I was pushing him, I knew I was, but the pain of his dismissal was too sharp. I needed to understand. "Yes. No. I don't know," he exclaimed, pushing his chair back and standing up, starting to pace the small kitchen space like a caged animal. "I just know that our friendship is the most important thing to me, and I feel like I just took a grenade to it. I can't lose you, Ethan. You're my best friend. You're the one person who—" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. He stopped pacing and stood with his back to me, his shoulders slumped in defeat. His words, meant to reassure, only twisted the knife deeper. He was so terrified of losing the friendship that he was willing to pretend the kiss, and all the intimacy that led up to it, meant nothing. He was invalidating everything I had felt, everything I had hoped for, chalking it up to his own confusion. The hurt was quickly being replaced by a slow-burning anger, an anger born of frustration and a deep, painful realization that he didn't see me, not really. He saw a friend, a fixture, a safe harbor. He didn't see the man who had been in love with him for years. I stood up as well. My own chair scraped against the floor, the sound harsh in the tense silence. "So you're just going to pretend it didn't happen?" I said, my voice cold and level. It was not a question. "We're just going to go back to how things were? Movie nights on the couch? You're just going to lean on me and fall asleep on me and act like none of it means anything beyond you needing a human security blanket?" He turned around slowly, and the look on his face was one of genuine shock, as if he had never considered how his actions might have been perceived, how they might have affected me. He saw my face, saw the hurt and the anger I was no longer trying to hide, and something in his own expression crumbled. The panic was replaced by a dawning, horrified understanding. "Ethan, he started, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't think. No." I cut him off, my voice shaking now with the force of my own suppressed emotions. "You didn't think. That's the problem, Liam. You just do. You just take the comfort you need without ever thinking about what it costs the other person. For months, you've been blurring every line between us. You come to my side of the couch, you put your head in my lap, you touch me like I'm yours. And then you kiss me. You asked to kiss me. And now you want to tell me it was a mistake? That it was just you being confused?" I took a step towards him. "What about me, Liam? Did you ever once stop to think about what all of this has been like for me?" The confession was out, hanging in the air between us, raw and undeniable. I hadn't said the words, "I love you," but they were there, embedded in every syllable, in the tremor in my voice, in the desperate, pleading look in my eyes. The silence that followed was profound. It was the silence of a bomb having gone off, the air thick with the dust and debris of our carefully constructed friendship. Liam just stared at me, his face pale, his mouth slightly open. He looked utterly lost. All the easy confidence, the golden charm, was stripped away, leaving only a raw, vulnerable man I had only seen glimpses of before. He sank back into his chair as if his legs could no longer support him. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. "I'm so sorry," he mumbled into his palms, his voice thick. "God, Ethan, I'm so sorry. I've been so selfish. I haven't been thinking about you at all. I've just been drowning. And you were there. You've always been there." He looked up, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "It wasn't a mistake," he said, his voice cracking. "The kiss. It wasn't a mistake. It was the most honest thing I've done in months. And it terrified me." My anger dissolved as quickly as it had appeared, washed away by the raw pain in his voice. I sat back down opposite him, the table between us feeling like a vast, empty canyon. "Why?" I asked softly. "Why did it scare you?" He took a deep, shuddering breath. "Because," he said, finally meeting my gaze, his eyes full of a desperate honesty. "When Sarah and I broke up, she said something to me. She said she felt like she was always competing for a part of me that she could never have. She said, 'The most important person in your life is Ethan, and I don't think you even realize it.' And I got so angry. I told her she was wrong, that you were just my friend, my roommate." He shook his head, a look of self-disgust on his face. "But she was right. After she left, the only thing I wanted was to be here, with you. The thought of going anywhere else felt wrong, unsafe." He leaned forward, his hands flat on the table, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "All those nights on the couch, I told myself I was just tired, that I just needed to decompress. But that was a lie. I was seeking you out. You're quiet, you're calm. Your presence. It's the only thing that's felt real, that's felt like home. And I didn't understand it. I didn't want to understand it. Because what does that mean? What does it mean if the person who makes you feel safest in the world, the person you want to be with more than anyone, is your best friend, your male best friend?" His confession laid him bare. All his confusion, his fear, his societal conditioning, all of it tumbled out into the space between us. He had been just as lost in our unnamed country as I had been, but he hadn't even had a compass. He was terrified of what his feelings meant for his identity, for his future, and most of all, for the one stable relationship he had left in his life. The retreat, the avoidance, the mistake. It wasn't a rejection of me. It was a rejection of himself. It was fear. "When I kissed you," he continued, his voice thick with emotion, "it was like everything clicked into place. For just a second, it all made sense. It felt right. More right than anything has felt in a very long time. And the second it was over, the panic set in. What did I just do? I've ruined everything. I've crossed a line and I can never go back, and I'm going to lose you." And I couldn't face that. I couldn't face you. The chasm between us began to close. His honesty was a bridge, built plank by painful plank. All the hurt and frustration I had felt was replaced by a wave of profound, overwhelming empathy. He wasn't a careless user of my affection. He was just a man, terrified and confused, trying to navigate a seismic shift in his own heart without a map. I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. His skin was cold. He flinched at my touch, then relaxed into it, turning his hand over to grip mine tightly. "You're not going to lose me, Liam," I said, my voice steady now. "You could never lose me. But you have to stop running. From this. From me." Tears finally spilled over and tracked down his face. He didn't bother to wipe them away. He just nodded, his grip on my hand tightening like a drowning man holding on to a life raft. "I'm done running," he whispered. I don't know how to do this." "Me neither," I admitted, a small, watery smile touching my lips. "But maybe we can figure it out together." And for the first time in 2 days, he gave me a real smile. It was small and fragile and stained with tears, but it was there. It was a flicker of light in the deep, dark water. It was a beginning, the real beginning. The conversation that night lasted for hours. We abandoned the dinner table and migrated back to the couch, our rightful territory. But this time, there was no pretense, no ambiguity. We sat facing each other, our knees touching, our hands still linked between us. We talked with a raw, stumbling honesty that we had never used with each other before. We dismantled the entire structure of our friendship, examined every beam and joist, and began the slow, careful process of building something new in its place. He told me about the quiet, creeping loneliness he had felt even when he was with Sarah, the feeling of not being truly seen. I told him about the years of silent affection, about the secret gallery of moments I had kept locked away in my heart. There were no grand declarations of love, no sweeping romantic pronouncements. It was quieter than that, more profound. It was a series of small, honest admissions. It was the laying down of arms, the mutual surrender to a truth we had both been avoiding. By the time the sun began to cast a pale, gray light through our living room window, we were both emotionally exhausted, but it was a good kind of tired. It was the satisfying ache of having done hard, necessary work. The air in the apartment felt lighter, cleaner. The brittle, sharp-edged silence had been replaced by a new kind, a silence that was soft and deep and full of unspoken understanding. That morning, we made breakfast together, a simple act that felt revolutionary. We moved around each other in the small kitchen, a familiar dance with a completely new rhythm. The casual brushes of our arms were no longer accidental. The shared smiles no longer held hidden meanings. When he handed me a mug of coffee, his fingers lingered on mine for a beat too long, a deliberate, gentle pressure that sent a jolt of warmth straight to my heart. It was a small, quiet promise. The new normal established itself with a surprising, beautiful ease. The anxiety that had been my constant companion for months simply evaporated. It was replaced by a quiet certainty, a sense of peace that settled deep in my bones. The ritual of movie night returned, but it was transformed. That first night, as we settled onto the couch, there was a moment of hesitation, a flicker of the old uncertainty. Then Liam looked at me, a soft, questioning look in his eyes, and I opened my arm. He didn't just lean his head on my shoulder. He curled into my side, wrapping an arm around my waist and tucking his face into my neck. I rested my cheek on the top of his head, breathing in the scent of his hair, and wrapped my own arm around him, holding him close. There was no movie, no distraction. We just sat there, in the quiet of our living room, holding each other. It wasn't a search for comfort anymore. It was the comfort itself. It was home. The physical language between us blossomed in the absence of ambiguity. It was a conversation spoken in casual touches, in hands that found each other while we walked down the street, in the way he would lean against my back while I was at my computer, resting his chin on my shoulder to see what I was working on. Each touch was a reaffirmation, a word in our new, shared vocabulary. It was tender and patient and deeply reassuring. We were learning each other again, not as teammates or roommates, but as partners. His bedroom door stayed closed. But it didn't matter anymore, because most nights, he wasn't in there. He was in mine. It started one night, a week or so after our talk. We had fallen asleep on the couch, and I woke up in the middle of the night with a cramp in my neck. "Come on," I mumbled, gently shaking him awake. "Let's go to a real bed." I expected him to stumble off to his own room, but he just followed me, bleary-eyed, into mine. He crawled under the covers on the other side of the bed and was asleep again in seconds. I lay there for a long time, listening to the soft, even sound of his breathing beside me, feeling the warmth of his body just inches from my own. There was no pretext, no excuse. Just a simple, shared desire to not be alone. It became our new routine. The open door was no longer a symbol of invitation. It was an irrelevance. We had chosen to be in the same room, behind the same closed door, together. We had built our foundation on the solid bedrock of a deep and abiding friendship, and now, we were adding rooms to the structure. We were building a home for this new, incredible love. It wasn't a love of fireworks and grand gestures. It was a love of quiet mornings and shared mugs of coffee, of inside jokes whispered in the dark, of knowing the exact right thing to say, and more importantly, of knowing when to say nothing at all. It was the profound peace of being completely, utterly seen by another person. A few weeks later, I was developing photos in the small darkroom I had set up in our second bathroom. The red safe light cast a warm, intimate glow over everything. I was working on a photo I had taken of Liam a few days before. He was sitting on the windowsill in our living room, looking out at the rain, a thoughtful, quiet expression on his face. He hadn't known I was taking the picture. As I watched his image slowly appear in the developer tray, emerging from the blank white paper like a memory surfacing, he opened the door and slipped inside, closing it gently behind him. He didn't speak, just came to stand beside me, his hip brushing against mine in the cramped space. He watched the photograph resolve, the details of his own face becoming sharper, clearer. I looked from the emerging image to the man standing beside me, his real, warm presence a comfort in the dark. He turned his head and looked at me, his eyes adjusting to the dim red light. He smiled, a slow, gentle curve of his lips. "There you are," he whispered, as if he had been looking for me. He leaned in and kissed me. It was different from our first kiss. The hesitation was gone, replaced by a quiet, confident tenderness. It was a kiss that tasted of certainty, of arrival. It was the feeling of a foundation that would never shift again. We stood there for a long time, in the quiet, creative dark, surrounded by the ghosts of captured moments, and we began to heal in the beautiful, honest silence we had finally learned how to create together. The greatest changes, I learned, don't announce themselves. They are developed slowly, in the dark, until the image of your new life is finally clear enough to see.